Hi, welcome back to another episode of Nobody's Doing It Right, the podcast for those who are uncertain. My name is Kat, I'm your host. For today's episode, we're going to talk about how you can't control the outcome, you can only control the input. And this is something that I have had to learn the hard way and have to keep relearning throughout my life as somebody who is very much a control freak. I feel safe in knowing everything, having control over everything. It feels like I'm protecting myself when I can predict things. But of course, there are many things in life we can't predict. There are many things in life we can't control. Some things we can control, some things we can't. And one of the main things that we can't control in life is the outcome of things. But we can control the input. We can control the way we show up, the things we do, how we do them, if we even do them, And I think that's really important to focus more of our attention on. Because as somebody who focuses too much on knowing and being sure and getting the specific outcome that I want, I think it can be easy to lose sight of what effort you have to actually put into something, understanding the moves you actually need to make, and also allowing the outcome to look the way it needs to look, because it might not at all actually be meant to look the way you think it's supposed to look right now. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with planning an outcome or wanting a specific outcome or vision boarding or whatever you like to do. I think that's really important because it gives you direction. And I think direction is an important part of this process. I think without direction, we lose sight of so many things and we can end up feeling, lazy, incapable, whatever. That's going to be a topic for another episode soon. But while there's nothing wrong with having a vision or, a desired outcome, you have to leave space for it to look and turn out the way it needs to, despite what you planned for. Because many times the outcome that we actually want or what is actually aligned for us will not look like what we thought it would look like in the beginning. And there are many examples of this, I'm sure, even in your own life that you can think of when there was a time where you planned for something, you wanted something very, very specific. And when you actually got it, it didn't look at all like what you had envisioned. It was still good. It wasn't any less good. It was just different. And I think that's so important, which is why we need to focus a bit more on the input, because the input is the only thing you can and should control, to be honest. It's the only thing that matters, ultimately, because the outcome is going to happen as it needs to happen, right? Sure, maybe your outcome can be more broad, it can be more general, and that's fine. But if we focus too much on the specifics of it, we lose sight of the input that we have to do. And ultimately, the only thing that really matters is showing up. And at the very least, all you have to do is show up. You don't have to be perfect in the way you show up. Because I think when we seek perfection in the way we show up, it's tied to this idea of what the specific outcome is going to be. So we are trying to be perfect because we want this outcome to look exactly how we want it to look, how we're envisioning it. And so we're putting this pressure on ourselves to act perfectly, to show up perfectly, to put in input that is perfect. When in reality, obviously, we don't know what the outcome is going to look like. So to aim for perfection in the efforts we take is based on a faulty foundation to what we're trying to achieve, because we have no idea what the outcome is actually going to look like. So how can we aim for perfection in our input if that perfection is not going to lead to anything specific, because it's going to look different? And also, your outcome is going to be different than somebody else's outcome, because we all have different levels of input. Everybody has different skills, everyone has different abilities, everyone has different capabilities, everyone has different resources, right? So your input has to be focused on in your way. But if you're focusing on an outcome because you think it's what you should do, it's what you see someone else doing, or what they have gotten, obviously you can use people as examples, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you focus too much on that specific outcome, you're ignoring the level of input that they were able to put into it, that you might not be able to put into it, or that you don't want to put into it because it's not aligned with you. That's something you have to keep in mind. You have to recognize that your input is different than somebody else's input, and that's the only true thing to you. Your outcome might look exactly like theirs, but you might have taken a completely different road to get to it. But the path, the journey is what's most important. It's not the destination, which is such a cliche thing to say, I know, but I think it is important to reframe it in these ways, or as many ways as possible, in order for it to stick, at least for me. I've had to reframe these topics so many times for myself and understand it in new ways so that I can fully grasp what I need for myself to feel okay. And this is one of those things. When I catch myself focusing too much on a specific outcome, I have to take a step back and look at the input I'm putting in. Is the input aligned with me? Is it aligned with my skills, my capabilities, my general enjoyment? Is it like enjoyable for me to put this in? That doesn't mean that it isn't work. It isn't effort. Of course, it's still going to be difficult at times, right? Because you have to put an effort and energy, and that's not always easy, quote unquote. But it should at least be in some way doable for you while still challenging, because that's how you get into flow state. So if your input is not at all aligned with you, it's aligned with this maybe perfectionist idea of what you think you should be putting in or what you saw someone else do because they got to this specific goal, that's not going to be sustainable. It's not going to feel good. And life is in the journey, right? Life is in the input. It's in the process. It's in the showing up. That's what life is. That's the culmination of your life. It's not really the outcome for the most part, right? Yes, you get goals, you get achievements, and those do, encompass your life in some way. But most of the time you're spending it on the path, on the journey, on the input. And if that input, that path, that journey is not fun or is not aligned with your morals, your values, your interests, your life is going to look like somebody else's. It's going to look not like yours. And it's not going to feel good, ultimately, I think, at least. And I've had to learn this my own way. And I've had to look back at a lot of the things that I've done or tried to do, the way I've tried to show up, and realize it'll get me to an outcome. Sure. I'm sure I can do this and it'll get me to where I want to be based on some idea of what this outcome should look like, but it won't feel good and it won't be sustainable. And that's happened to me so many times. I've cycled through these processes so many times. A lot of it for me is that I try to be more of a type A person, which I'm not at all. And that's okay. But I've been conditioned to believe that type A is the way everybody should be. That's the best type of person to be, is type A. Someone who's a go-getter, who's always active, who always has so much energy all the time. And I'm sure that really serves our current system, being that kind of person. I think people who are naturally that kind of person get a lot more benefits in the way things are set up right now. But I'm not one of those people. And every time I try to be them, it works out for a little bit. And I can get the specific outcome that's tied to being that kind of person. But then what happens is I crash. I burn out. I don't feel good in the way I've lived my life up until the point that I got this outcome that I was trying to get. And is that really worth it? It's not for me, for the most part, right? I end up feeling so disconnected from myself because I can't do this forever. I can't act like this type of person forever. That's not who I am. So what happens, at least for me, is that I swing to the opposite side of the spectrum, right? Like the pendulum swings to the opposite side because I'm trying so hard to be one way. And then when I crash and I burn out, I swing all the way to the other side. So I get to the extreme of being, a bit more low energy and losing motivation, losing inspiration. Like that, I don't want to be in that place. I don't want to be swinging back and forth like that. I want to find a nice, comfortable middle ground in the way I show up. And that means having to be aligned with the level of input that I can control and that is right for me and that works for me without focusing too much on the outcome. Yes, have direction, have a goal that you want to get to, have an abstract goal in a sense, but don't focus on the specifics a lot of the time because they're not going to look like what you thought they were going to look like. They're going to look different, but they'll still be just as satisfying because they were aligned with the path you're taking, with the input you're giving to this situation, the thing that you want to get. And ultimately, I think it's really important to remember that your input will also change throughout your life. So what you're able to put into something now might not be what you're able to put in later on in your life, or it might be more later on, or it's going to fluctuate, it's going to change. So it's important to focus on the current level, the moment, right? Focus on the present, because that's the only thing you can control. So if you are able to show up at a certain level today, then give it. Show up. Put in whatever it is that you can put in. If you're able to only show up less the next day, put in still whatever you're able to put in. It doesn't matter if it's, not 100% all the time, or maybe not the idea of what you think it should be like compared to somebody else. Whatever it is for that moment, just put it in. That's the only thing you can control. It's better than not putting anything in. And I think also it's better than putting too much in. Because again, that'll burn you out. That'll make you feel unaligned with yourself, disconnected, and won't be sustainable in the long run. So if you're like me, if you struggle with focusing too much on the output, finding yourself losing sight of your actual desires because you're thinking, my outcome has to look specifically like this, and if it doesn't, then I'm a failure. You're not, because you cannot control the outcome. The only thing you can control is the input. If you're on a fitness journey and you want to potentially look a certain way, when you start putting in whatever efforts you want to put in, the way you're going to look is going to be how you're going to look. Genetically, biologically, whatever works for you naturally is going to be how you look. It's not going to be how you saw somebody look in a picture or whatever. It's going to look the way it needs to look for you. And that's important to keep in mind because it'll mitigate disappointment, as I've realized from my own journey. It'll mitigate disappointment, and it'll make you realize that your version of this thing that you're trying to attain is still valid. It's still valid the way it looks for you, whatever that might be. It might be your career endeavors, your creative work, again, your physical fitness, your mental health, like whatever that is for you, whatever you're working towards, is going to look your way, and that's still valid. But the only thing you can control to get to that place is the input, is the work you put in. And the work should be aligned with you, and it should not be, so forceful that it doesn't feel good, that it doesn't at least feel satisfying in some way. I hope this was helpful. I hope it was informative. I hope it reframed this idea for you. If you want to talk about these things with me one-to-one, you can book a call. You can follow me on Instagram and TikTok where I post my videos. And I also have a Substack where I write about these topics. But other than that, thank you for listening, and I'll be back again soon with another episode.